Hey guys, I'm T and welcome to the channel. If you're new here, we make trending and fun crochet tutorials twice a week, and if you haven't already, smash that like button, drop a comment down below, and subscribe to join in on the fun. Today's tutorial is for a lovely textured top, sporting not quite 3/4 sleeves, a plunging scoop neck, and a relaxed casual fit. Speaking of, by now y'all already know the drill, but just in case you're new, the best casual modern crochet tutorials and patterns are here, with even more dropping twice weekly, so consider clicking the bell to subscribe and you'll never miss an upload. Also, do me a huge favor and give this video a big thumbs up if you like it, or 2 thumbs down if you don't. Either way, it's a great way to show support so I can keep putting out free tutorials every Wednesday and Sunday. Now, it's time to get on the show, so without further ado. For this project, any category 4 yarn will work, but I used a total of 315 grams of yarn. That's 700 yards if you're stateside. As for tools, a 5mm hook, scissors, stitch markers, and a tape measure. There is a written pattern down below. Use offer code TCDDIY for a discount off any $9.99 plus order, and enter this week's pattern giveaway by telling us which is your favorite flightless bird. I think that penguins are pretty neat. Details for the giveaway down below. We're using 4 stitches for this project, and they'll be as follows. Chain, slip stitch, single crochet, half double crochet, and double crochet. This tutorial is made for size small. You can adjust it for your size and explain how to in the video, so let's get started. Getting this top started, we're all going to grab our category 4 yarn and make a slip knot. Then we're all going to grab our 5mm hook and start off by making a chain that is in multiples of 8 that starts 1 inch underneath our underarm down to our waist. Now I'd like for mine to be just about 6.5 inches or 16 centimeters, so I'm going to start by making a chain 32. Now that we have our chain, we're all going to get started on our first almond stitch row. We're all going to start by blocking off that last chain into a chain 1. That chain 1 doesn't count as a stitch, that's our turning chain. Then into the chain that we blocked off, or the second chain from our hook, we're all going to insert with a slip stitch. So insert, yarn over, and gently pull through everything on our hook. Again, into that next chain, into there, yarn over, and gently pull through everything. Now for the almond stitch detail, unless we stated otherwise, it will be worked in sets of 4 stitches. So we just did 2, we need a total of 2 more slip stitches. So into that next, pull through everything, into that next, pull through everything, and now we should all have a total of 4 slip stitches. Now when we're working our stitches, we want to make sure that we're not tugging too tightly, otherwise the falling row can be too tight to work into. Then after our 4 slip stitches, we're going to be doing 4 half double crochets. So yarn over, into that next chain, insert, pull through, yarn over, pull through 3, there's our first. Into that next chain, insert, pull through, yarn over, pull through 3 with our second. Into that next with our third, and next with our 4th half double crochet. From here, we're going to continue to do 4 slip stitches, 4 half double crochets until we all have 4 chains left. So we've made our way down with our row 1, leaving the last 4 chains. Now from here, we're going to do our increase. Now what we're all going to do is 3 half doubles, and into that last stitch an increase of 5 half doubles. So into that 4th to last chain, insert with 1 half double, that should be the next stitch in our stitch sequence. Into that 3rd to last, then into that 2nd to last, we should all have 3 half doubles. Then into that last available stitch, insert with 5 half double crochets. So yarn over, into that last chain with 1, same last chain with a second, same last chain with a third, same last chain with a 4th, same last chain with a 5th half double crochet. Now our row 1 is complete, and we should all have 4 more stitches than chains made. Now technically our almond stitch is a 4-row repeat, so for the following 3 rows we will not be doing any increases or decreases. So what we're all going to do from here is chain 1, flip our work. We're all going to start with 4 slip stitches, but now all the rows are going to be within the back loops. So finding the last stitch from our previous row, we're going to insert into that back loop, yarn over, and gently pull through everything on our hook. There's our first, into that next with a second back loop slip, next with a 3rd back loop slip, and next with a 4th back loop slip, because remember we still worked in sets of 4, then 4 back loop half double crochets, yarn over, into that next stitch's back loop, with 1, next stitch is back loop with 2, next with a 3rd, and next with a 4th. From here, we're going to continue with 4 back loop slips, 4 back loop halves to reach the end of the row. We have just completed our row 2. Now we should have the same amount of stitches as our previous row, and now to get started on our row 3, or as a quick tip, any odd number row, for this portion of our top, each of our stitches is going to be the opposite from what our previous row stitches look like. So for everyone, our following row is going to start with 4 back loop half doubles. But if we're taking a look at those stitches, the first set of stitches from our previous row look like back loop slip stitches. Because that's the case, and this is an odd number row, we're going to start with 4 back loop halves, 4 back loop slips, all the way down to reach the end of the row. So from here, chain 2, flip, and start with 4 back loop halves. There's 4 back loop halves, then 4 back loop slips. These are 4 back loop slips. From here, continue with 4 back loop halves, 4 back loop slips to reach the end of the row. So we are back. Our row 3 is now complete. Now we're going to get started on our row 4. So for this portion, every even number row is going to look like what our previous row stitches look like. So as an example, the first set of stitches that we have over here look like 4 back loop halves. So we're going to do 4 back loop halves to get started on our even number row, or our row 4. So chain 2 and flip. Then to get started on row 4, we're going to do 4 back loop halves. When our 4 back loop halves are completed, 4 back loop slips. Then to complete the row, continue with 4 back loop halves, 4 back loop slips to reach the end of the row. So we are back and our first 4 rows are completed. Now when it comes to doing our almond stitch detail, it is technically a 4-row repeat, but for this underarm portion, for every 5th row, we are going to be doing an increase along the top. Now the increases can be done just a little bit differently because of the amount of stitches that we have. So I'm just going to get started on the following 4 rows together, just so we have all the rows down, and then I'll let you do the rest on your own. So to get started on our row 5, we're all going to chain 1, flip our work. Start with 4 back loop slips, 4 back loop halves, making our way all the way down, leaving the last 4 stitches. So we are back and we've made our way down with our row 5. We should have all left the last 4 stitches. Now we're going to do our increase. So leaving the last 4 stitches, we're going to get started on the following 4 stitches in our stitch sequence, which we all should have ended right after a set of 4 back loop half doubles. So we're all going to do 3 back loop slip stitches, then an increase into that last stitch. So into that next stitch with 1 back loop slip, into that next with our second, next with our third, that should have left us with 1 stitch left. Into that last stitch, it is going to be another increase of 5 half doubles. Now we're doing an increase of 5 half doubles because that gives us the best curve all the way up to our underarm. So just into that last back loop with 5 back loop half doubles again. And now our row 5 is complete. For this portion, every increase row should have 4 more stitches than our previous row. Then the following 3 rows won't have any increases or decreases, so just to talk you guys through it, we're all going to chain 2 and flip. We're going to start with 4 back loop halves, 4 back loop slips, making our way all the way down. Our row 6 is now complete. Now to get started on our row 7, chain 2, flip. 4 back loop halves, 4 back loop slips to reach the end of the row. We are back and our row 7 is complete. Now to do our row 8, we're all going to chain 1, flip our work. Start with 4 back loop slips, 4 back loop halves to reach the end of the row. So we are back and our first 8 rows are complete. Now from here, we're going to continue to repeat our 8 previous rows all within the back loops until we now have a portion that can stretch from mid-underarm, remembering that it does have a decent amount of stretch to it, over to the front of our body, so roughly where a bra strap or a tank top strap would lay. Now we must end in rows in multiples of 8 plus 1. So as an example, we'll end on 9 rows, 17 rows, 25 rows, so on and so forth. Then once we have that last row, I will meet you guys back. So we are back. We have just completed the underarm portion. Now I have a total of 9 rows. My width is just about 2.5 inches or 6 centimeters unstretched. Now what we're all going to do from here, since we all should have ended along the top, is make a chain that is in multiples of 8 that reaches the top of our shoulder. Now we want to make sure that we're keeping this tail end still at 1 inch underneath our underarm because we don't want that to drop too low. Then go ahead and make our chain. Now I went ahead and already made my chain. I needed roughly 3.5 inches or 9 centimeters, so I made a chain 16. Then from here, we're going to do our same almond stitch rows all the way down. So what we're going to do is block off that last chain and do a chain 1. Into that chain that we blocked off, or the second chain from our hook, we're going to insert with a slip stitch, and we're going to do our normal almond stitch per usual. So 4 slip stitches, 4 half doubles. Once we reach the body, the last set of stitches should have been half doubles, so the first set of stitches into the body should be 4 back loop slips, 4 back loop halves, and make your way all the way down to reach the end of the row. So our first shoulder row is complete. Now for the shoulder portion, we are going to continue on with our 4-row almond stitch repeat with no increases and no decreases. So just to get started on the following row, everyone's last set of stitches from our previous row should have been back loop slip stitches. So from here, we're going to chain 2, flip our work. Start with 4 back loop halves, 4 back loop slips to reach the end of the row. So we are back and we have just completed our second shoulder row. Now from here, like I said, we aren't going to do any increases or decreases for the shoulder portion. So just as a refresher, every even number row, which is going to be our falling row, is just going to be a repeat of our previous row's stitches. So as an example, my last set of stitches here look like 4 back loop halves. So I'm going to chain 2, flip my work, start with 4 back loop halves, then 4 back loop slips to reach the end of the row. Then every odd number row will be the opposite from what our previous row stitches look like. So we're just going to continue to do our almond stitch rows with no increases, no decreases, until we now have a portion that can stretch from mid-underarm all the way over to we're roughly 2 inches away from the side of the base of our neck. Then I will meet you guys back once we have rows that is in multiples of 8. So I'll meet you guys back along the bottom. Then we can get started on the neckline. So we are back and we have just completed the shoulder portion. Now I have a total of 16 rows. My width is just about 3.5 inches or 9 centimeters unstretched. Now we're going to get started on the decrease side of our neckline. So we're using air quotes for the decrease side because we aren't going to be doing actual decrease stitches. We're just going to be skipping some stitches until we make our way down to the depth of the neckline that we want. So what we're all going to do, no matter what size we're making, is start by inserting our stitch marker into the 8th stitch from the top. Then from here, since we should all be along the bottom, we're going to get started on the following row. Everyone's following row should start with 4 back loop slips, then 4 back loop halves, making our way all the way up until we reach our stitch marker. We are back and our first neckline row is complete. Now we're going to make our way all the way back down with our following row, and since our following row is an even number row, we're just going to do what our previous row stitches look like. So since our last set of stitches should have been back loop slip stitches, we're going to chain 1, flip our work, start with 4 back loop slips, 4 back loop halves, making our way all the way down. Alright, so we are back and we have just completed our first 2 neckline rows. Now from here, we're just going to continue to repeat these 2 rows until we get the depth of the neckline that we want. So as a refresher, we're going to insert our stitch marker into the 8th stitch from the top. The top is now going to be from our previous row. Then we're just going to do the following row in our row sequence. So since we should all be along the bottom, our falling row is going to start with 4 back loop halves, 4 back loop slips, making our way all the way up until we reach our stitch marker, and then I will meet you back. Our third neckline row is complete. Now we're going to get started on the 4th. So we're going to chain 2, flip our work since the last set of stitches that we should have all had was back loop halves, and start with 4 back loop halves, 4 back loop slips to reach the end of the row. So we are back. Our first 4 neckline rows are complete. Now from here, it is going to be a repeat of our 4 previous rows. So as a refresher, just make sure that we're inserting our stitch marker into 8th stitch from the top of our last row. Then just do the following 2 rows in a row sequence with absolutely no increases, no decreases, and repeat. From here, we're just going to continue to repeat these 4 previous rows until we have a neckline that can reach the depth of the neckline that we want, but keeping in mind that we are going to have a collar around it as well. And also, we want to make sure that this portion that we have doesn't stretch past 1 inch before mid-chest, because we are going to have a slant, but then the bottom is going to be a little bit more of an oval, so it is going to scoop and then make our way back up, so not an actual v-neck. So we just want to make sure that these rows aren't going too far past mid-chest. But either way, I will meet you guys back once we have a total of rows that is in multiples of 8. Then I will meet you guys back to do our few middle rows. We are back. We have just completed the decrease portion of my neckline. I now have a total of 24 rows. My width is just about 5.5 inches or 14 centimeters unstretched. Now what we're going to do from here is our neckline. So from here, we're all going to insert our stitch marker into the 4th stitch from the top from our previous row, just so that we have a little bit of a differentiator for the depth of our neckline. Then from here, we're going to do our following almond stitch row until we reach our stitch marker. Then just continue to do our almond stitch rows with no increases, no decreases, working our way across the middle of our chest. So as a refresher, we should all be along the bottom, and our following row should start with 4 back loop slip stitches. So chain 1, flip our work. Start with 4 back loop slips, 4 back loop halves, making our way all the way up until we reach our stitch marker. So our first neckline row is complete. Now from here, our following row is going to start with a chain 2 flip, 4 back loop halves, since the last set of stitches that we should have all done was back loop halves, 4 back loop slips to reach the end of the row. Then, like I said, continue to do our almond stitch 4 row repeat with no increases, no decreases, making our way across our chest. Then I will meet everyone back right after we have that portion completed, making sure that we have rows in multiples of 8 plus 1, because we all want to end along the top. Then I'll meet you back to do the increase side of our neckline. So we are back. We have just completed our neckline width, and now from here I have a total of 33 rows, remembering that it needs to be in multiples of 8 plus 1. Now my total width is just about 7.5 inches or 19 centimeters. Now from here, we're basically going to mirror everything that we did here on the other side. So since we all should have ended along the top, we're going to get started on the following row. So we're all going to start by doing a chain 4, because remember we skipped a total of 4 stitches before we got started on the width of our neckline. Then from here, we're all going to do our following 2 rows. So once we have our chain 4, we're going to start with a chain 1, that's our turning chain, and make our way down with 4 slip stitches, working our way down our chain. Then once we reach the body, 4 back loop halves, 4 back loop slips to reach the end of the row. Then we're going to chain 2, flip our work, and then make our way up, doing the following row with no increases and no decreases. And then I'll meet you guys back so we can do the chain so we can get started on the increase portion of our neckline. So our first 2 neckline increase rows are completed. Now we're going to get started on the following ones, which is going to be done pretty much the same way as our previous one, but instead of a chain 4, we're now going to do a chain 8 because we all skipped a total of 8 stitches. So since we all should have ended along the top, we're all going to make a chain 8. Then the following row is going to start with 4 halves, 4 slips, then once we reach the body, 4 back loop halves, 4 back loop slips to reach the end of the row. Then at the end of the row, we're going to make our way all the way back up, and then I'll meet you guys back when we have our 2 following rows completed. So we are back. Our following 2 rows for our neckline are complete. Now from here, we're going to basically repeat what we just did. So we're now going to make a chain 8 since we all should be along the top. Then the following row is going to start with 4 back loop slips, 4 back loop halves, making our way all the way down, then make our way back up with a row right after that, and then I will meet you guys back. So we are back. We have just completed the first 6 rows for the increase portion of our neckline. From here, it is going to be a repeat of our 4 previous rows until we have the same amount of rows that we have on this side of our neckline. Once we have the same amount of rows, I will meet everyone back so that we can get started on the shoulder. We are back and the increase portion of my neckline is complete. Now my total width is roughly 9 inches or 23 centimeters unstretched. Now we're going to do the shoulder portion together, so that's going to be fairly simple. Now since we all should have ended along the top, and we have a chain 8 to do because we still have this last set of stitches that we skipped, we're still going to chain 8. Then we're just going to do the following almond stitch rows with no increases and no decreases for the same amount of rows that we have for this shoulder portion. So just as a refresher, after our chain 8, what we're going to do is chain 1, flip our work. Start with 4 slips, 4 halves, then once we reach the body, 4 back loop slips, 4 back loop halves, making our way all the way down. Then just repeat our almond stitch rows. Like I said, no increases, no decreases for the same amount of rows. Once we have the same amount of rows, I will meet everyone back so we can do our underarm portion together. So we are back and the second shoulder portion is complete. Now my total width is just about 10.5 inches or 27 centimeters. Now we're going to finish up with our underarm. So first things first, since we all should have ended along the bottom, we're going to insert our stitch marker into the same amount of chains that we made that led up to the shoulders. So for those of you that have my numbers, I made a chain 16. So on this side, I'm going to insert my stitch marker into the 16th stitch. Since we're along the bottom, we're going to do the following row. So for everyone, it should start with 4 back loop slips, 4 back loop halves, making our way all the way up, leaving the last 5 stitches right before our stitch marker. Then I'll meet you back. We are back. We've made our way up with our first underarm row, leaving the last 5 stitches right before our stitch marker. Now what we're going to do is a decrease of 5 back loop double crochets. So the last set of stitches that we should have all had is 3 back loop half doubles. Now to do our decrease of 5 back loop doubles, we're all going to yarn over. Insert your hook into that following stitch's back loop, pull through, and we're going to continue that until we reach that last stitch. So into that next stitch, pull through, next stitch, pull through, next stitch, pull through, and next stitch, which should be the last, pull through. Now, we should all have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 loops on our hook. So we're going to yarn over and pull through the first 6. That should leave us with the last 2 loops. Then yarn over, pull through 2. Now our first decrease underarm row is complete. Now, basically mirroring the other underarm portion, we are then going to have 3 almond stitch rows with no increases and no decreases. So just to let you know, we're going to chain 2, flip our work. Start with 4 back loop halves, 4 back loop slips to reach the end of the row, then do 2 additional almond stitch rows with no increases and no decreases. Then I'll meet you guys back when we're about to get started on our 5th row for our underarm portion, just so we can decrease together once more. We are back and we have our first 4 underarm rows completed. Now, just to get started on the following row, we're all going to chain 1, flip our work. Start with 4 back loop slips, 4 back loop halves, making our way all the way up, leaving the last 5 stitches again. We've made our way up with our 5th row, leaving the last 5 stitches. Now we're going to do another decrease of 5 back loop doubles. So what we're going to do is yarn over, insert your hook into that 5th to last, pull through, next, pull through, next, pull through, next, pull through, and next, which should be our last, pull through for a total of 7 loops on our hook again. Then yarn over, pull through the first 6, leaving us with 2 loops, then yarn over, pull through 2. And from here, we're going to do our 3 following almond stitch rows with no increases and no decreases. So the following one is going to start with 4 back loop slips, 4 back loop halves, then do the following 2 rows after that. Then I will meet everyone back once we have a total of 8 rows completed. Our first 8 underarm rows are completed. Now from here, we're going to continue to repeat these 8 rows until we have the same amount of underarm rows as the first one that we made. I have a total of 9, so I'm actually just going to get the following row started, and then I'm going to complete it, do a chain up 1 and cut, then I'll meet y'all back. We are back and the entirety of our front panel is completed. Now I have a total of 12 inches or 30 centimeters, and that is unstretched. Now once we have the entirety of our front panel completed, we're actually going to be making a back panel that is done pretty much the same way as the front, but without the neckline cutout. So just to talk you guys through it, we're all going to start by making a chain for the same amount of chains that we made for the front panel's underarm, then do the same exact underarm portion. When we have that, make the same chain that we made that led all the way up to the shoulders, then just do our almond stitch rows with no increases, no decreases, for the same amount of rows that we have from our first shoulder row all the way across to our last shoulder row. Then once we have that, we're going to do the same underarm portion that we just did together. Then once we have both front and back panel completed, I'll meet you guys back so we can seam everything together. So we are back. Now that we have both front and back panel completed, we're now going to seam everything together. So first things first, we're going to place our front panel on top of our back panel, making sure that the front of our almond stitch detail is faced in on each other. Now we can very clearly tell which side is the front and which side is the back. The front is going to have these nice little pockets for us, which looks a little bit cleaner, and the back is going to look a little bit more bulgy. We're going to want to make sure that the cleaner edges is faced in on each other. Then we're going to insert our hook into the top corner stitch of both the front and the back panel. We are then going to insert our yarn onto our hook, pull through, and do a chain up of 1 to secure. Then we're going to single crochet into both the front and the back panel at the same time, just putting 1 single crochet into every side row. So finding our first side row, this is mine right here. I'm going to find that top loop, insert. Find the first top loop within the back panel, insert with just 1 single crochet. Again, into our following side row, this is mine right here. I'm going to find that top loop, insert. Following side row within the back panel, find that top loop, and single crochet. We're going to continue doing this until we don't have any more stitches left to work into. When we don't, do a chain up 1 and cut, then repeat on the other side. So now that our shoulders are all seamed together, we're now going to seam the sides. So making sure that our work is still flipped wrong side out, meaning the seam for the shoulder that we just did is still on the outside, we're going to insert our hook into the bottom corner stitch of both the front and the back panel, then do a single crochet seam again. So insert your yarn onto your hook, pull through, and do a chain up of 1 to secure. Then find that first stitch into the front panel, insert, first stitch into the back panel, insert with a single crochet. Again, first stitch into the front panel, stitch into the back panel, and single crochet, and we're going to continue doing this till we don't have any more stitches left to work into. When we don't, do a chain up 1 and cut, then repeat on the other side. So we are back. We have just seamed everything together. Now from here, we're going to get started on our neckline. So first things first, we're going to start by inserting our hook into any one of the stitches that we have within the neckline. Then we're going to put 1 single crochet into every stitch. Then once we reach our side rows, we're going to put 1 single crochet into every side slip, 2 single crochet into the first side half double, and then 1 single crochet into the next side half double. So I've inserted my hook into the stitch that I have that's nearest to my shoulder seam, and I'm going to work down my front panel first. So start with putting 1 single crochet into every stitch. It should all be 8 single crochets for everyone. Then I will meet you guys back when we have those 8 single crochets completed so that we can work into this little corner that we have right here. So we are back. We put 1 single crochet into each of our stitches, which is a total of 8 for me. Now we're just going to find the first stitch into this little ledge that we have right here and just continue on with our single crochet row. So we're not going to do anything different. Simply putting 1 single crochet into every stitch. So just find that corner stitch into this ledge and single crochet and continue with 1 single crochet into every stitch. Again, once we reach this little ledge or this little corner right here, once we're worked into that last stitch, just put 1 single crochet into that first stitch and continue all the way down until we reach our first side row. So we've made our way down our neckline with our single crochets and we have finally reached our few side rows that we have right here. So let's get that started. So everyone's first side row right here should be a side half double crochet row. We're just going to be putting 1 single crochet into that top loop. Then after that, we should have 2 side slips, 2 side halves until we make our way across. So finding our first side slip stitch row, we're going to find that top loop and insert into that top loop, starting with just 1 single crochet. This is my following side slip stitch row. It is this divot, so I'm going to find that top loop and insert with 1. Then this is my first side half. Into the top of that side half double crochet row, 2 single crochets. So into that top loop with 1, into that same top loop with a second, then into our last side half double right here, insert with just 1. Then from here, continue with 1 single into every side slip stitch row, 2 single into the first side half, and then 1 single into the following side half, making our way all the way across. Then once we've made our way all the way across, making our way up our neckline, again, simply put 1 single crochet into every stitch. Once we reach the corner, just find that next available stitch, then single crochet all the way down, next available stitch, single crochet all the way down. We're going to continue doing that, making our way all the way up, and then across is working our single crochets the same way that we did across the front panel. When we've made our way all the way around, slip stitch into that chain space, then I'll meet you back. So we are back. We have just completed our single crochet row. Now from here, we're going to slip stitch into that chain space, then make a chain the length that we like for the collar to be. I'd like for mine to be just about 1 inch or 2 centimeters. So from where we're at, I'm going to start by making a chain 5. Now that we have our chain, we're going to block off that last chain and do a chain 1. Now that chain 1 doesn't count as a stitch, that's our turning chain. Then into that chain that we blocked off, or the second chain from our hook, we're going to insert with a slip stitch. So into that chain, go ahead and insert, yarn over, and gently pull through everything on our hook. We want to make sure that we're not tugging too tightly, otherwise the following row will be too tight to work into. Again, into that following chain, insert, yarn over, pull through everything, and continue with 1 slip stitch into every chain. So we've made our way down with our first slip stitch row. Now we're going to connect it into the base. Finding that next available stitch into the base, we're going to insert in through there with a slip stitch. Now that slip stitch doesn't actually count as a stitch, that's just to connect. Then to work our way up to the following row, we're going to slip stitch into that following stitch into the base. Still doesn't count as a stitch, and now flip our work. Then we're going to put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. So finding the last stitch from our previous row, not worked into any of those slip stitches into the base, we're going to insert in through that back loop, yarn over, and gently pull through everything. There's our first. Again, next stitch is back loop, yarn over, pull through everything. Continue with 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. Then at the end of the row, chain 1, flip our work, and put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch again, and I'll meet you back at the end of our row 3. We are back. We have just completed our first 3 rows, and now we're going to connect it into the base together once more. So just finding that next available stitch, we're going to insert, yarn over, gently pull through everything on our hook, just to connect, then to work our way up to the following row, slip stitch into that next available stitch into the base, flip our work, and repeat. From here, we're going to continue to repeat these 2 previous rows, making our way all the way around. When we don't have any more stitches left to work into, I'll meet you back so we can seam it all together. So we have made our way all the way around with our back loop slip stitch rows. We don't have any more stitches left to work into, so now we're going to seam it together. Now this seam is going to be an outside loop slip stitch seam, so we're all going to start by making sure that our work is flipped right side out, right side up. Then we are going to insert our hook into that first available stitch, insert only in through that front loop. Then into the back panel, insert only in through that back loop or the loop that's furthest away from us. Then yarn over, pull through all 3 of those loops that's on our hook. Let's do this again. Into that next stitch into the front panel, insert in through that front loop. Next stitch into the back panel, insert in through that back loop. Then yarn over and pull through all 3. And that's it. We're going to continue doing this till we don't have any more stitches left. When we don't, do a chain up 1 and cut, then I will meet you back. So getting started on our sleeve, what we're going to do is first make sure that our work is slipped right side out, right side up. Then insert our hook into the stitch that we have that's nearest to our side seam within the armhole. Then we're going to do a single crochet row. So first things first, working our way up our underarm portion, all we're going to do is put 2 single crochets into every side decrease row or increase depending on what side of the sleeve we're working on. Those are the ones that we have our decreases into. Then just 1 single crochet into every side row. So getting that started together, we're all going to start with a chain 1, which I already have. Finding our first side row, it is going to be our first side increase / decrease row, which is this right here. So we're going to find that top loop and insert with 2 single crochets. There's 1, there's 2. Then we're going to be putting 1 single crochet into every side row until we reach our following decrease or increase row. So finding our following side row, here is 1, following side row, 1, then following side row again with 1. We should have 3 side rows in between each of our increase rows. We're at our following increase row, so insert in through there with 2 single crochets. There's 1, there's 2, and that's it. Continue on with 1 single crochet into every side row, then 2 single crochet into each of our side decrease rows. Then once we reach our stitches, 1 single crochet into every stitch, making our way all the way up until we reach our shoulder seam. Alright, so we made our way up with our single crochets until we reached our shoulder seam. Now we do need to make sure that on this side of our sleeve prep, it does need to be in multiples of 6. So go ahead and add an additional stitch or 2 if you guys need to into that last stitch. I actually need to add an additional 2 stitches into that same last stitch before our shoulder seam. So here is 1, and here's also 2, and we're going to insert our stitch marker into the top of that stitch for 1 of our middle stitches. Then we're going to repeat the same thing, working our way down the other side. So just 1 single crochet into every stitch. If we needed to add an additional stitch on this side, we're going to have to add it on this side as well because we need to have the same amount of stitches on both sides. Then working our way back down our underarm, 2 single crochet into each of our side decrease or increase rows, and 1 single crochet into every stitch in between. So just to do the first one on the other side of our shoulder seam, finding that first stitch, we're going to insert our hook in through there with 1 single crochet, and we are going to insert a stitch marker into the top of that stitch so we know where our 2 middle stitches are as well. Go ahead and get the rest of the single crochet row completed, and I'll meet you back. So our single crochet row is complete. Now from here, we're going to get started on the length of our sleeve. So from where we're at, right after we slip stitch into that chain space, we're all going to make a chain that is in multiples of 8, the length that we'd like for the sleeve to be. So long, 3/4, or short. I'd like for mine to be 3/4. So I'm going to start by making a chain that's 7.5 inches or 19 centimeters, and that's going to be a chain 32 for me. Then once we have our chain, what we're going to do is block off that last chain and do a chain 1. That chain 1 doesn't count as a stitch, that's our turning chain. Then into that chain that we blocked off, or the second chain from our hook, start with our almond stitch. So start with 4 slip stitches, 4 half double crochets, and I will meet everyone back when we have a total of 4 stitches left. So we've made our way down with our first row, leaving the last 4 chains. Now what we're going to do is 3 half doubles, and then an increase of 5 half doubles into that last chain, because the last set of stitches that we all should have done should have been slip stitches. So we now have our 3 half double crochets. Into that last chain, insert with 5 half doubles. So we've just inserted our 5 half double crochets into that last chain. Now we should have 4 more stitches than chains that we made. Now we're going to connect it into the base. So how we're going to connect it into the base is by slip stitching into the second stitch into the base. So making sure that our work is still flipped right side out, right side up, we're going to insert our hook clockwise because the almond stitch isn't reversible. So counting our first 2 available stitches, here's 1, here's 2. Into that second stitch, we're going to insert with a slip stitch. Now that slip stitch doesn't actually count as a stitch. That's just to connect. Then to work our way up to the following row, we're going to slip stitch into that following stitch, into the base, flip our work, then do the following row. So it's going to start with 4 back loop slips, then 4 back loop halves. So just to do the first set of stitches, finding that last stitch from our previous row, not working into any of those slip stitches into the base, we're going to insert into that back loop with our first back loop slip, second, third, and fourth, then 4 back loop halves, 4 back loop slips to reach the end of the row. Then to get started on our row 3, we're going to chain 2, flip our work, start with 4 back loop halves, 4 back loop slips, making our way all the way down, leaving the last stitch so we can increase together again. We are back. We made our way down with our row 3, leaving that last stitch. Now, just like our previous odd number row, an increase of 5 back loop half doubles. And now to connect it into the base the same way that we just did our row 1. So count up the next 2 available stitches. There's 1, there's 2, slip stitching into that second stitch into the base. Then to work our way up to the following row, slip stitch into that following stitch into the base. None of those slip stitches count as a stitch. Flip our work, and just like our row 2, 4 back loop slips, 4 back loop halves to reach the end of the row. So we are back. Our first 4 rows are completed. Now what we're going to do from here is continue to repeat our 4 previous rows until we're worked into our first stitch marker stitch. Then I'll meet everyone back so we can do the decrease side of our sleeve. So we are back. The increase side of our sleeve is complete. Now we're going to do the decrease side. We all should have ended along the bottom. Our following row should start with 4 back loop slip stitches. So just do our 4 back loop slips, 4 back loop halves, making our way all the way up, leaving the last 5 stitches, and then I'll meet you back. We've made our way all the way up with our first decrease row. We should have all left the last 5 stitches. Now, just like for the underarm portion, we're all going to do a decrease of 5 back loop doubles. And now that that decrease of 5 back loop doubles is completed, we're going to connect it into the base the same way that we did for the increase side of our sleeve. So we're going to start by counting up the next 2 available stitches. That next stitch is my following stitch marker stitch. So into that next, insert with a slip stitch. Slip stitch still doesn't count as a stitch, that's just to connect. Then to work our way up to the following row, slip stitch into that following stitch into the base, and flip our work. And now that our work is flipped, our following row is going to start with 4 back loop slips, 4 back loop halves to reach the end of the row. Then to get started on the following row, chain 2, flip our work, 4 back loop slips, 4 back loop halves, making our way all the way back up, leaving the last 5 stitches, and then I'll meet you back again. So we are back, and I have just completed my first 3 rows for the decrease side of my sleeve. I did make my way all the way back up, left the last 5 stitches, then went ahead and did a decrease of 5 back loop doubles, that's per usual. Now just connect it into the base the same way. So counting up the next 2 stitches, there's 1, there's 2, slip stitch into that second stitch into the base to connect. Then to work our way up to the following row, slip stitch into that following stitch into the base, flip our work, then 4 back loop slips, 4 back loop halves to reach the end of the row. From where we're at, all we're going to do is continue to repeat our 4 previous rows, making our way all the way down. When we don't have any more stitches left to work into, I'll meet you back so we can seam our sleeve together. So we are back. We have the increase and the decrease side of our sleeve completed, and now we're going to seam it all up together. Now this seam is going to be a single crochet seam, so the same seam that we did for the sides. So I went ahead and already did mine, so I'm just going to talk you guys through it. Start by making sure that our work is flipped wrong side out because we want the seam to be along the inside. Then do our same single crochet seam all the way up. When we don't have any more stitches left to work into, do a chain up 1 and cut, then I'll meet you back so we can get started on the cuff. So now that our sleeve is all seamed up, we're ready to get started on our cuff. So first things first, we're going to make sure the work is flipped wrong side out, meaning the seam that we just did for the sleeve is now along the inside. Then we're going to insert our hook into any one of the side rows that we have along the bottom edge of our sleeve, and we're going to do a single crochet row, just putting 1 single crochet into every side row. So what we're going to do is pull through and do a chain up of 1 to secure. Then finding our first side row, this is mine right here, which is this divot, I'm going to find that top loop and insert with 1 single crochet. Into my following side row, which is this raised row, find that top loop with a single and 1 single crochet into every side half double crochet row as well. So this is mine. Insert into that with 1, insert into the following with just 1 as well. Continue with 1 single crochet into every side row, make my way all the way around, then I'll meet you back. So we are back. Our single crochet row along the bottom edge of our sleeve is complete. Now we're going to do our cuff, and our cuff is going to be done exactly the same way as the collar, so I'm just going to talk you guys through it. After our single crochet row, we should have all slip stitched into that chain space. From here, we're all going to make a chain the height that we'd like for the cuff to be. I like for mine to be just about 2 inches or 5 centimeters. So I'm going to start by making a chain 10, Then doing our back loop slip stitch rows with no increases, no decreases, making our way all the way around. When we have that completed, I will meet y'all back and then we can seam it together. So we are back. We've made our way all the way around with our back loop slip stitch rows. We don't have any more stitches left to work into, so now we're going to seam it together, but this seam is actually going to be done exactly the same way as the collar. So another outside loop slip stitch seam. So just to talk you guys through it, we're going to make sure the work is slipped right side out, right side up. Do our same outside loop slip stitch seam till we don't have any more stitches left to work into. When we don't, do a chain up a 1 and cut, then repeat everything we did here on the other side. So now that our sleeve and cuffs are completed, we're now going to get started on the bottom band. So first things first, make sure that our work is flipped right side out, right side up. Insert our hook into any one of the side rows that we have along the bottom of our piece. Then just like for our cuff, we're going to be putting 1 single crochet into every side row. So go ahead and get that single crochet row completed and then I'll meet you back. But just as a really quick tip, that single crochet row is going to be as wide as this portion can stretch. So once when it's completed, try your piece on. If it's a little too tight, reduce some stitches with a looser grip. Or if it's too loose, reduce some stitches with a tighter grip. Then I'll meet you back. So we are back. Our single crochet row is completed. Now from here, we're going to do our back loop slip stitch rows. So just like for the collar and the cuff, we're going to make a chain the length that we'd like for the bottom band to be. I'd like for mine to be just about 3 inches or 8 centimeters. So I'm going to start by making a chain 15. Then back loop slip stitch rows with no increases, no decreases till we don't have any more stitches left to work into. When we don't, I'll meet you back so we can seam it all together. So we have made our way all the way around with our bottom band and we are all done. Now we're going to seam it together using the same outside loop slip stitch seam that we did for the collar and for the cuff. So just do our same seam. Once we don't have any more stitches left to work into, do a chain up 1 and cut, then we are all done. Then the last thing we have to do is just weave in all of our ends. And there you have it, y'all. Hope y'all enjoyed the tutorial. Join us on Instagram, Pinterest, or Twitter. Those links are down below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Catch you on the next one. Bye.